The Federalist, most well known as the Federalist Papers, is a series of 85 essays that were written between October 1787 and May 1788. The essays were published anonymously under the name Publius in newspapers throughout New York. With that said, they were written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. And we know who most of them are attributed to, and we can make educated guesses about the others. You'll see what I mean in a minute when we discuss a few specific Federalist Papers. So you may be wondering why these 85 essays were written. The answer to that is that the Federalist Papers were an attempt by the writers to urge New Yorkers to ratify the proposed United States Constitution, which was drafted in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. In order to adopt the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation would need to be replaced. So the authors were trying to explain the different parts of the Constitution in great detail so the people would be able to understand the various parts and rally behind its passage. It's important to note that both Hamilton and Madison were members of the Constitutional Convention, and because of this, throughout history, the Federalist Papers have been used to interpret the intentions of the individuals who created the Constitution. So this brings us to another important point. In addition to addressing the various aspects of the Constitution, the Federalist Papers were also used to address points of dissent or any disagreements that were arising related to the Constitution. And that's where we see the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. There were some key differences between these two groups. The Federalists wanted a strong government and a strong executive branch, while the Anti-Federalists wanted a weaker central government. Federalists wanted a representative democracy with a single representative for every 30,000 people. Anti-Federalists wanted stronger state governments at the expense of the federal government. They wanted frequent elections, smaller districts, and a more direct democracy. In a direct democracy, the people decide on policies without any lawmakers or representatives, while in a representative democracy, people vote for representatives who then enact the policy initiatives. The Federalists did not want a Bill of Rights. They thought that the new Constitution was enough. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, demanded a Bill of Rights. The reason that a lot of the Anti-Federalists wanted a weak central government was because they saw what happened in Great Britain with King George III, and they equated a strong government with one that could easily become tyrannical. Others were concerned about having a strong government because they were afraid that a strong government would be dominated by the wealthy. The Anti-Federalists thought that the states had already given up too much power to the new federal government. So now let's take a look at a few of the key essays from the Federalist Papers. We'll start with Federalist Paper number 10, written by James Madison. Federalist Paper number 10 is among the most highly regarded of all American political writings and is perhaps the most famous of all the Federalist Papers. Again, as we just discussed, the point of these papers was to explain to the citizens all of the different aspects of the Constitution that were being proposed. In Federalist Paper number 10, Madison writes that a strong federal government can protect liberty because it can guard against the dangers of control by a narrow interest, which he called a faction. Federalist Paper number 10 is considered an explicit rejection of direct democracy by the Founding Fathers. Instead, it argues that a representative republic would be more effective against partisanship and factionalism. From this perspective, the larger, the better. Federalist Paper number 10 is important because it warns us about the power of factions and competing interests over the United States government. It argues that in a representative democracy, ideas can be examined by qualified office holders, and the odds of one majority group getting all of the political power is nearly impossible. So both Federalist Paper number 10 and Federalist Paper number 51 examine how to make a government that's strong, but not too strong. And we'll take a look at Federalist number 51 in just a moment. Federalist Paper number 14 was written by James Madison. According to the Articles of Confederation, each state retained its sovereignty, freedom, and independence in every power, jurisdiction, and right. But we just took a look at how the system set up by the Articles of Confederation did not work and was ineffective in so many ways. So the Constitution aimed to create a stronger general government with 3 branches. Federalist Paper number 14 addressed one of the biggest anti-federalist objections, which was that the large size of the United States would make it impossible to govern justly as a single country. In Federalist Paper number 14, Madison addresses this, and he also clarifies the difference between democracy and republic. Madison explained that in a democracy, when an assembly is necessary, every citizen would need to attend. Of course, this would be way too much with a large territory where the citizens are spread out. Instead, when there is a republic, only the representatives need to gather, which is a lot more practical. Federalist Paper number 31 was written by Alexander Hamilton, and in it, he argued that the government must possess all the powers necessary for achieving its objective, and these powers can't be limited because it's impossible to predict what problems the country could face in the future. The government also had to have money to fulfill the responsibilities of the country, so there has to be a means of making revenue. One of these means, and the one that is the focus of Federalist Paper number 31, is the power of taxation. Hamilton argues that the representatives will do what they have to do to prevent the abuse of the power of taxation, and he dismisses anti-federalists who thought that giving the federal government the authority to tax would make it tyrannical while leaving the state governments at the mercy of the national government. Federalist Paper number 39 was written by James Madison, and in it, he continues to define the Republican form of government. He says that a government cannot be called Republican if it gets its power from a few people or from a favored and wealthy class. Federalist Paper number 39 also explains the mixture of federal and national elements in 5 essential parts of the Constitution. Its ratification or foundation is national. The sources of its ordinary powers are partly federal in the Senate and partly national in the House. The operation of its powers on individuals is national. The extent of the powers are federal, and the method of amendment are neither wholly federal nor national. So based on the mixture of elements, Madison concluded, quote, "The proposed Constitution, therefore, is in its strictness neither a national nor a federal constitution, but a composition of both." Federalist Paper number 51 was written either by James Madison or Alexander Hamilton. So this one addresses the idea of checks and balances and the separation of powers for the government. As you know, the idea of checks and balances and the separation of powers are important aspects of our national government. In Federalist Paper number 51, the author, who's most likely Madison, gets into all of the details about the 3 branches of government, the legislative, judicial, and executive branches, and how they will each be self-sufficient, not having too much power, while also having some power over the others. Ultimately, Federalist Paper number 51 is an argument about how the various powers of government should be exercised separately and distinctly in order to guard the society against the oppression of its rulers. Federalist Paper number 58 was written by James Madison. This is the last one we're going to cover here, and this one deals with the apportionment of representatives for each state. Constitutionally, the number of senators per state is 2, no matter what the population of the state is. The number of representatives, however, in the House was going to be determined by population. So at the time, 30,000 per representative. The anti-federalists worried that the promises that were being made by the Constitution's proponents would go unfulfilled, and they did not believe that the number of representatives would actually increase over time as a result of the census, which was a topic that was discussed in Federalist Paper number 55. So in Federalist Paper number 58, Madison warns that if the House becomes too large, it would pose a greater threat to liberty than if it remained too small, and how fewer representatives in the House are actually more beneficial than having a big number. His reasoning was that when there are more representatives than needed, passion would rule over logic and order, and with more representatives in the House, chaos would prevail over order and unification. Madison felt that the more representatives in the House, the less information and insight each representative would be able to have. Madison also argued that if there are more representatives, they are more likely to be easily persuaded by a cunning speaker because the weak-mindedness of the majority cannot withstand the shrewdness of the minority. In Federalist Paper number 58, Madison also briefly discussed how some of the states wanted rulings to be passed on a vote of more than a majority. But he said that this method of voting is inefficient and that no laws would ever get passed. Also, it would result in a government that is more oligarchic than democratic, because oligarchies follow the rule of the elite minority instead of the majority.